As he moved forward, Gutchen quickly calculated that he needed only 3 steps to reach his target. He believed that since Yoan was briefly distracted, he could move from the side and close the distance. He also thought that as long as Yoan was using the heavenly lightning flash, Yoan would not be able to move freely. Gutchen kept thinking that if he could land even one strike, Yoan would have to stop before killing him. At that moment, the fighting spirit of the alliance would rise again, and together they could defeat Yoan. After reaching this conclusion, Gutchen gritted his teeth and pushed his power even further. Yang Yungan and Satie watched the situation carefully and realized that only 7 steps remained. Someone from the outer line shouted for them to attack the Demon Lord. As the distance closed, they counted silently in their minds. 6 steps, 5 steps, 4 steps. Finally, 3 steps remained. They continued moving forward through the endless attacks. Suddenly, Yang Yungan shouted in alarm. He urgently warned Warlord Mu Gutchen to stop, saying it was too dangerous for him to advance alone. The brown-haired man beside him also turned in shock. But Gutchen only smiled calmly and sent a message to Chief Hong asking him to tell his family that he had fought until his last drop of blood. After sending the message, he immediately jumped forward. Seeing this, everyone cried out in pain and called Warlord Mu's name. Filled with madness, Gutchen thrust his drilling force directly toward Yoan. Yoan responded with cold mockery, saying they had started everything and were now acting out a tragic scene. Then Yoan moved his body slightly and easily avoided the attack. In the next moment, he twisted Gutcheon's arm and pinned it behind his back. Gutchen screamed in pain. Yoan then froze his entire body so he could only groan helplessly. Satie shouted in disbelief. He could not understand how Yoan was still able to move while using heavenly lightning flash. At that moment, Yoan suddenly appeared behind Satie. Feeling someone behind him, Satie turned his head with burning anger. He swung his sword and cursed Yoan as a monster. But Yoan instantly crushed Satie's wrist, struck his chest with his palm and pierced straight through his body. Satie vomited blood and realized that his core had been destroyed. As his body froze, he screamed in terrible pain. Yoan coldly said that Satie was not allowed to die yet. Seeing this, Peng Guyu quickly stepped back while Yang Yungan ordered everyone to retreat and keep their distance. Yoan looked at them and smiled coldly, asking where they thought they could run. Realizing their escape was blocked, Yang Yungan cursed in frustration. In an instant, Yoan rushed forward and froze both of them as well, leaving them only able to scream helplessly. Yoan then spoke with cruel contempt and asked if their little drama was finally finished. Soon the sound of limbs being torn apart and someone screaming filled the air. Gutchen trembled and thought in disbelief that this could not be real. They had been prepared to die, yet now they were forced to watch others die instead. Filled with rage, Gutchen shouted at the Demon Lord and demanded to be killed instead. He asked why Yoan would shamelessly trample on the dignity and sacrifice of a warrior. Yoan only smiled faintly and mockingly asked if that was truly sacrifice. Then Yoan slowly clenched his hand into a fist. The remaining people looked up in confusion. They wondered if Yoan had finally stopped because his energy had run out. The brown-haired man also doubted the situation. He remembered that back at the castle of Jin, Yoan had maintained heavenly lightning flash for more than 30 minutes, so it seemed impossible that his power had already ended. Gutchen continued shouting angrily at the Demon Lord. He declared that no matter what Yoan planned, if he wanted to rebuild the alliance, the Muram alliance would never allow it. Yoan interrupted him coldly and said Gutchen talked too much. In the next moment, Gutcheon's jaw was violently twisted out of shape. Satie cried out in shock and called Yoan a cruel demon, accusing him of attacking someone who could no longer fight. Yoan calmly replied that since Gutchen was so willing to die for his goal, he could not ignore such determination. Yang Yungan asked what he meant by that. Yoan smiled coldly and said he would give them a chance. Everyone present was shocked by those words. Yoan then spoke to the warriors of the Muram alliance. He said he did not believe everyone there truly shared the same beliefs. The crowd became silent as people began thinking deeply. Gutchen stared ahead in disbelief, wondering what Yoan was planning. Yoan continued speaking. He explained that even though he had given them many chances, their leaders still tried to kill him and his followers. Unlike them, he said he did not hide behind a mask of justice like hypocrites. Anyone who threatened him or his subordinates was always destroyed completely, so no future danger remained. However, since their leaders had chosen to sacrifice themselves, he would make an exception. Yoan said that although he disliked leaving unfinished problems, he was not someone who enjoyed bloodshed. He clearly stated that he had no desire to slaughter thousands of people. The brown-haired man carefully listened and was surprised by Yoan's words. He wondered if Yoan was actually suggesting peace. But then he tightened his grip on his staff and reminded himself that they must not lose their determination in front of the cult leader. With firm resolve, the brown-haired man shouted loudly that Yoan should not think their warriors could be shaken so easily, and that they would never fall so cheaply. Yoan calmly replied that things did not need to go that far. He said the choice he was offering was very simple, and the commanders and soldiers themselves could decide. Peng Guyu gritted his teeth in anger and called Yoan a coward. He believed this was only a trick to make them fight among themselves. In his mind, Yoan wanted to exchange the lives of their leaders for others. Such a threat, he thought, would only unite the alliance even more. Soon he spoke with scorn, mocking the cult leader Cheon and asking if Yoan really believed they would sacrifice their own leaders to save the others. Yoan replied with a faint mocking smile, and said Punguyu had misunderstood. He repeated that the choice was very simple. Then Yoan raised his hand toward Punguyu, and explained that if the families of their leaders were willing to exchange their lives for the remaining soldiers, he would forgive everyone there. He then pointed at the rest of the crowd and boldly declared that all of them would be spared. Hearing this, Punguyu and the brown-haired man were completely shaken. Gutchen stood in shock. He realized that Yoan was forcing them to choose between the lives of their families and the survival of the remaining warriors. Punguyu shouted in disbelief and asked if Yoan was truly telling them to sacrifice their own families. He called the idea madness. As soon as he spoke, the people behind him changed their expressions. One by one they looked at him with clear hatred and killing intent. Yoan sounded amused. He said they always spoke proudly about sacrifice, but he wondered if their words had any real meaning. Gak Yin thought quietly. If only the commanders' lives were in danger, everyone would fight to the death together. But now the situation was different. Saving the leaders' families meant sacrificing the commanders themselves. Satie clenched her teeth and silently cursed, chanting Amitabha in her mind. She admitted that Yoan was extremely cunning. As monks without families like herself, Elder Gak Yin and Chairman Hong, even a careless word from them could cause great chaos. The brown-haired man looked around and argued that the Murim alliance had been formed by free will, not strict military orders. Its members were not soldiers who blindly followed commands. They could not simply order everyone to die. The crowd fell silent. Many wondered why the leaders were saying nothing. They stared at the brown-haired man's back and silently questioned whether the leaders' families were more valuable than their own. They felt the leaders preached sacrifice for justice but offered nothing themselves. To them it was pure hypocrisy. Under thousands of staring eyes, the brown-haired man felt heavy pressure. Yoan sighed. He said they claimed to follow justice but used it only when it helped them. They broke their oaths easily, which disgusted him. He added that stagnant water always rotted. Whether it was their alliance or his 6 great sects, they were all the same. He slowly rose into the air and said they clearly had no answer. Giving them more time would be useless. As he finished speaking, thousands of ice swords appeared in the sky. Yoan calmly said it seemed their leaders had chosen to protect their families. As fellow followers of the righteous path, he hoped they would respect that decision. One man panicked and shouted for cult leader Cheon to stop. He asked why they had to sacrifice themselves for other people's families. Another man quickly agreed and said their own families were just as important. If they died, who would take care of them? The young man angrily told everyone not to fall for Yoan's trick. He warned that Yoan was trying to create conflict among them. If they allowed themselves to be shaken, they would fall into his trap. He insisted they should unite and kill him instead. Another man shouted back in anger. He said they were not fools and already understood that, but everyone should look at their current situation. Soon many people shouted together. The leaders had been stalling for time and talking about sacrifice for the orthodox path, but it was ordinary martial artists who had died under the heavenly flash. Gutchen felt stunned. He thought this could not be happening. The ordinary martial artists were turning against each other. He wondered if this had been Yoan's plan from the start. At the same time, Yoan slightly curled his lips and looked at the 2 young men. He asked loudly what they had done all this for. A one-armed man clenched his teeth and answered angrily. They had no weapons, and even the masters could not defeat Yoan. They had no way to stop the heavenly flash. He accused letters of simply wanting them to die. Furious, the man asked why they had to sacrifice themselves. If leaders truly saw them as members of the alliance, then leaders should carry the burden this time. He tightened his fists and continued. Did only leaders' family matter? If they counted all the alliance members and their families, far more lives were involved. Why was leaders just standing there watching? The 2 bald men could only think helplessly that everyone had fallen for such a simple trick. Yet anyone would hesitate in this situation. 2 others angrily argued back. Were they supposed to kill their own families, who had nothing to do with this? How could anyone even suggest such a thing? Another man stammered that the higher-ups were placing all responsibility on them while never saying they would sacrifice anything themselves. Satie frowned and silently prayed again, thinking such words should never be spoken. A furious young man then shouted loudly. He asked if everyone had heard what was said. How could anyone trust people like that and still talk about justice? He declared they should no longer sacrifice themselves for such leaders. Others began shouting in agreement. One by one they introduced their names and clans and said they refused to sacrifice themselves as well. Satie glanced sideways and sent a message to the venerable sect leader Hong. She said there was no way to calm them now. Though it was humiliating, they had no choice but to retreat immediately. Master Hong could only answer weakly and apologize. Satie gave a small nod and thought that cult leader Cheon had already won. She believed Yo-won would not kill him and silently hoped Hong would survive. She whispered another Buddhist prayer. Meanwhile the crowd kept shouting. They demanded to know why they alone had to make sacrifices. Their voices grew louder as the chaos spread. Suddenly Gak Yin stomped his foot and stepped forward, chanting Amitabha. He shouted with all his strength. His voice shook as he asked why members of the alliance were fighting each other. Acting on behalf of the commander as the second master, he ordered everyone to retreat at once. The two men nearby stared at him in shock and asked if he truly meant they should retreat. Gak Yin roared and ordered everyone not to form any formation. Instead, he told all alliance members to run immediately without hesitation. As soon as he finished speaking, Peng Guyu and another man jumped into the air to escape. Someone nearby shouted in shock, unable to understand what was happening. The two remaining men looked at each other in doubt, wondering if their leaders were truly running away. While fleeing, Peng Guyu thought coldly that shame and humiliation no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered now was escaping and protecting his family. Seeing their leaders run, the remaining members shouted that they should follow them. Watching everything, Yo-won crossed his arms and smirked. He thought it was foolish for them to believe they could escape when the area was surrounded by mountains on three sides. As they ran, the fleeing group shouted that they should split up and run in different directions to create as much distance as possible from the heavenly flash. Filled with resentment, Peng Guyu swore that one day he would make the demonic cult leader pay for this humiliation. Suddenly he stopped. Someone behind him shouted in confusion and asked what had happened. Peng Guyu clenched his teeth in anger and cursed quietly as he stared ahead. In the distance he realized that Yo-won had not come alone. Mercenary stood firmly in front of them, blocking their path. Behind him were all of Yo-won's subordinates, each ready to fight. Peng Guyu's eyes widened with anger when he recognized them as the Dark King and the elite warriors of the demonic cult. When his eyes landed on Jusheng Dan, he raised an eyebrow. Seeing the silver hair and fur clothing, he wondered if the man was from the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Although he was not sure why he was there, Peng Guyu was certain that the silver-haired man was a martial master. Looking farther ahead, Peng Guyu noticed Yin Moa and frowned. He wondered who she was. She seemed skilled, but no one was protecting her. Thinking she was an easy target, he decided to attack her. Without hesitation, Peng Guyu raised his sword and rushed forward, ordering the others to follow him. Seeing this sudden move, Baek Ji froze in shock and wondered if Peng Guyu was serious. Wang Hul sneered and called him an idiot, saying he was simply asking to be killed. On the battlefield, Yin Moa and Peng Guyu clashed fiercely. Shocked, Peng Guyu demanded to know how a young woman like her could block his attacks so easily. Angered by his words, Yin Moa felt furious and thought about what he had just called her. In the next moment her sword flashed across his neck. Peng Guyu's head separated from his body. Unable to understand what had happened, he let out a broken cry before dying. One of his followers screamed in horror and called out to Patriarch Peng, realizing with disbelief that he had died far too easily. Yin Moa landed gently on the ground as Peng Guyu's head rolled away. She stepped on it with a dull sound and coldly said that she had lived longer than he ever did. Elsewhere, Jusheng Dan released his freezing magic. Instantly the remaining enemies were trapped in ice. They screamed in terror as the cold spread through their bodies. Two of them trembled as they realized half of their bodies had already frozen. In fear, they wondered what kind of monster this man was. Jusheng Dan calmly said that although it was painful to say this to former allies, none of them would leave alive. One man held his injured arm and thought bitterly that the enemy had been waiting at the only escape path. He finally understood that the demonic cult leader had allowed them to run on purpose so they would run straight into their own deaths. Watching Manhwa continue her ruthless killing, the man admitted that this result came from their own choices. They had chosen to protect their families instead of standing with their allies. Looking toward Yo-won, whose figure burned with power, he silently prayed that the demonic cult leader would keep his promise. Suddenly a man stepped forward and clasped his hands. He loudly introduced himself as Seong Jingyong. He said that they had accepted cult leader Cheon's offer and believed he would not break his word. Hearing this, Yo-won stopped his raised arm. The many ice swords floating in the air also stopped. Jingyong panicked and asked why cult leader Cheon had only partially taken back what was promised. At that moment, Yo-won descended and calmly interrupted him, saying he would keep his promise. Soon after, several people arrived carrying large boxes and landed behind Yo-won. Hyobong respectfully reported that they had brought everything Yo-won had ordered. Yo-won nodded with satisfaction and praised their work. He opened one box and said the other two boxes would not be needed. Seeing this, the others became suspicious and wondered what pills were inside. Yo-won answered coldly and told each of them to take one pill and leave. The group was horrified and shouted in disbelief, asking if the pills were poison. Yo-won calmly replied that they were indeed poison. Seong Jingyong immediately began sweating and protested. He reminded Yo-won that he had promised to let them live and asked why he was giving them poison. He insisted this was different from what was promised. Yo-won responded coldly and asked how it was different, saying he saw no problem. Hearing this, Hyobong and Baek Ji smiled darkly. Yowon then cruelly declared that he was indeed letting them live. At the Orthodox Murim Alliance campsite, an open field surrounded by mountains on three sides, thousands of people gathered. So he stood there with tears running down her face. She clenched her fists and cried uncontrollably while repeatedly apologizing. After the war, the ground was covered with blood from more than 2,800 bodies. The corpses of many leaders, except the 6 masters, lay piled among the dead. So he kept bowing her head and crying bitterly without stopping. At that moment, Yowon stood quietly on a hill with his grandfather and looked down at what was happening below. His grandfather stayed silent for a while, thinking deeply as he watched the people holding pills in their hands. Some of them were even stumbling as they walked. With a grateful tone, he told Yowon that he was thankful he had shown mercy to Shaolin at his request. While rubbing the back of his hand behind him, he said that far more blood had been shed than he had expected. He added that it was natural for martial artists to refuse humiliation, even when they were trapped. Cheon-in-ji remembered when he had checked the opponents by placing his hand on their abdomen. He realized that about 600 people had died after refusing to take the poison. They had chosen death because they did not want to live under the poison's control and become a burden to their families. He glanced at Yowon, who stood quietly lost in thought. The old man frowned and wondered if this cruelty had come from the Shaolin teachings Yowon had received. Yowon's methods were much more ruthless than he had ever imagined. Soon Yowon spoke calmly. He said they had been given a choice, so there was no reason to free those who refused the poison. He added that at first he had planned to kill them all. The story then moved slightly into the past. 2 days earlier, inside the Heavenly Demon Cult's meeting tent, Yowon had just learned that the Murim Alliance was trying to force a battle between him and the combative divine. At that moment, so he knelt on the ground and begged him to spare them. Yowon rested his chin on his hand and replied coldly that such matters were not for a prisoner of war to worry about. He told her to leave, but so he kept pleading. She said most of those people had been forced into the war against their will and asked if they should not try to reduce meaningless deaths. Mercenary sharply scolded her. He said she had forgotten that she was a prisoner of war just because the demon lord had allowed her some freedom. He then ordered that she be tied up immediately. Hearing this, so he quickly shouted for them to listen to her. She insisted that if Yowon showed even a little mercy, she would personally make them surrender. Yowon looked surprised and asked what she meant. He wondered if she was planning a strategy for him. So he struck her palm on the ground and firmly said that she was not asking him to save everyone, only those who surrendered. She added that she was begging with her life at stake. Yowon narrowed his eyes and asked if she truly believed she could make them surrender. After hesitating for a moment, so he said she could. She thought that cult leader Cheon had shown no mercy to his enemies so far, but she still wanted to reduce their losses as much as possible. Yowon remained silent and thought about her suggestion. He felt that it was not a bad idea. If he followed her plan, it could divide the orthodox martial artists. However, he also considered that the survivors might become obstacles in the future. After thinking for a while, he closed his eyes and made a firm decision. He said he would not accept her request and ordered her to leave. Hearing this, so he urgently called out to him again. At that moment, Cheon-in-ji suddenly spoke and asked if Yowon could talk with him. Soon the two of them moved to the top of a hill. Standing with his hands behind his back, the old man gently suggested that Yowon reconsider the girl's proposal. Yowon calmly replied that the Orthodox Murim Alliance had ignored his offers of peace many times. He explained that the reason they had brought such a huge army to Changbi Mountain was to kill both him and the Six Swords troop. Because of this, showing more mercy would mean nothing. Cheon-in-ji glanced at him and said that just as the girl had mentioned, some of those people had not come willingly. But seeing Yowon's expression, he realized it would not be easy to change his mind. Then the old man asked if Yowon planned to unite the entire Jianghu. Walking slowly forward, he explained that such a goal could not be achieved simply by killing every enemy. Ruling with fear alone would only cause endless problems. A true lord must both punish and reward, and real unification comes when people willingly submit and are ruled. Yowon closed his eyes and thought for a moment. He said he had no desire to become a despot, but if people still tried to take his head after he had given them many chances, then they had to pay the price. He then asked if his grandfather was saying all this because of his relationship with Venerable Ji-Yu Young. The old man was briefly surprised. Seeing his reaction, Yowon sighed and finally compromised. He said he understood and would show them mercy. His grandfather quickly thanked him. Yowon then smiled slightly and said he would add one more condition to the plan. The old man made a doubtful sound while Yowon looked down at the people below and thought quietly. Now that they had been poisoned, they would never even dream of revenge. It would also serve as a warning to the Orthodox Murim Alliance. Soon someone brought a torch near the corpses. The flames quickly rose and spread, burning everything around them. After a moment, Cheon-in-ji asked if Yowon was going to Changbi Mountain next. Yowon answered firmly that he was. As the wind blew through his hair, he thought about their next step and said they needed to take the Wind White Tiger's essence core first. Meanwhile, in the eastern region of Shanghai province, among empty mountain cliffs, two people rode their horses along a narrow road. Wang Ol cursed angrily. He shouted that the damned Orthodox Murim alliance had even sent troops to Huang Mountain. The person riding with him asked anxiously how the enemy had discovered their location. Wang Ol replied in irritation that he did not know, but said that was not the important issue. Narrowing his eyes, he warned that there were 20,000 enemy troops while only 4,000 of their own forces remained there. If they lost that base, their entire plan could fail. Looking at the road ahead, he said the Blade Master should already be crossing Shaanxi with the elite forces. Although the Wind White Tiger's essence core was important, this situation was more urgent, so they had to hurry. Just then, a group of riders rushed toward them from the opposite direction. Wang Ol shouted with excitement when he recognized them, and called out to the Great Supreme. The Great Supreme laughed coldly and called Wang Ol by name. Wang Ol urgently asked where the Blade Master was. He explained that the base at Hong Mountain was under attack by the Orthodox Murim alliance and that the message had to be delivered immediately. The Great Supreme calmly told Wang Ol not to worry. He explained that the Blade Master had already received the message and had left for the base alone 4 days earlier. Wang Ol was shocked and asked if the Blade Master had really gone by himself. He then carefully asked why the two of them were here, if they already knew the base was in danger. With an arrogant laugh, the Great Supreme said they were going to Changbai Mountain under the Blade Master's orders. Wang Ol immediately asked why Changbai Mountain. The Great Supreme lowered his head with a sly smile and told him not to worry. He said the Blade Master would meet them soon and that they only needed to follow his orders. He then began talking about the situation at Hang Mountain in Shajiang province. At that moment, thousands of arrows were fired. Many people were hit and screamed in pain while coughing blood. Zhigang raised his sword and shouted for everyone to keep moving forward. He ordered them not to hold back their arrows and to shoot while filling them with kai. With a satisfied smile, he thought that if they kept attacking like this, they could defeat the enemy by night. On the other side, Li Ma cast a spell and shouted as he released several flying swords. The swords swept across the front line and cut down the enemies blocking the path. The wounded cried in pain as they fell. At the same time, Peng Qian stepped forward and remarked that Li Mok was truly determined. He said Li Mok had turned the entire mountain into a fortress. Li Mok calmly replied that the enemy would not last long. The Jaggle clan's formation experts had already said that it would take 4 hours to remove the traps at the entrance. He calculated that they would capture the place that night and set up an ambush. If everything went as planned, they could kill both the demon god and the supreme saber of the 6 martial sects within 2 weeks. Li Mok then waved his hand and shouted that the martial artists of the Orthodox Murim alliance should win this war and build the foundation of justice. Hearing this, everyone shouted loudly in response. Suddenly, an arrow pierced a man, making him groan in pain. Li Mok thought carefully that even though the enemy elites were gone, several masters at the Supreme Peak realm still remained, so they had to stay alert. Just then, a calm voice suddenly spoke, saying that Li Mok truly deserved to be the leader of the Orthodox Murim alliance. Li Mok's face immediately stiffened. When he looked at the man standing before him, panic filled his mind. Even though he had been focused on the battle, he had never lowered his guard. Yet he had completely failed to notice this person's presence. Peng Qian quickly drew his sword and demanded to know who the intruder was. The man casually waved his hand and laughed coldly. He said it had been a long time since someone dared to point a sword at him from such a distance. Then he simply moved his arm for a moment. Peng Qian's face froze. In the next instant, his body was cut from head to toe. The strike was so sharp that it seemed to slice through space itself. The people standing behind him were also hit by the remaining force and cried out in pain as they collapsed. Seeing Peng Qian fall to the ground covered in blood, Li Mok shouted in shock and called out to Master Peng. Fear filled his heart as he wondered if that attack had been the formless blade. He could not believe that a simple wave of the man's hand had been enough to kill him. Still shaken, Li Mok asked who the man really was. The man calmly smiled and said that he was the one standing at the peak of all blade arts. Meanwhile, near Changbai Mountain, thousands of riders were moving across the land on horseback. Yoan rode in front on a powerful black horse. At that time, Qianji was lost in deep thought. He kept remembering a conversation that had happened before they left. In an open clearing, someone had spoken with gratitude, saying that thanks to Yoan's group, the monks of Shaolin had been saved. He warned that the combative divine Akui who lived on Changbai Mountain was a terrifying monster. One strike from him had been enough to knock down several masters. He explained that they had not tried to make the demon god fight Akui because they underestimated him. The speaker was Zen Master One from the hidden recluse forest. With his palms together, One said that as a member of the Murim alliance he stood against the cult leader Qian, but as a monk he did not want Yoan's grandson to rush into a dangerous battle. He added that although he might be mistaken, that day Akui had seemed like he was protecting them from someone. As the wind blew, Qianji asked what he meant. with a serious face. One said it had felt less like a Kui was stopping them from entering Changbai Mountain, and more like he was trying to keep them away from danger. While they were retreating, they had sensed a terrifying killing intent. Everyone thought it came from a Kui, but one felt something was wrong. That killing intent did not belong to a Kui. The memory ended there. In the present, Qianinji frowned as he thought about the ultimate realm that all martial artists dreamed of reaching. At that level, even the smallest movement could release incredible power. Since the combative divine could do such things, he must have reached the peak of martial arts. It would not be wrong to call him the strongest master in the Jianghu. Yet even after hearing all this, Yowon showed no sign of worry. Looking at Yowon riding ahead, the old man wondered if he was hiding his concern so others would not worry, or if he was truly strong enough to face such an enemy. Holding the reins tightly, he thought that according to Zen Master 1, the combative divine would try to stop them from entering Changbai Mountain. No matter what happened, they would eventually clash with him. Suddenly, Hyobong excitedly shouted that he could see the mountain. He said he had heard there was a lake at the peak that touched the sky, and wondered if the rumor was true. Baek Ji sighed and told him to stop talking nonsense. Kong Moying then turned back and nervously admitted that he no longer knew the path from that point. Hearing this, Yowon quietly hummed. As he looked at the mountain ahead, he felt strong spiritual energy coming from it, making it a perfect place for internal energy training. However, he could not sense the presence of the combative divine yet. He thought they would learn more once they got closer. After deciding, Yowon raised his hand and ordered everyone to move forward. The group quickly sped up and answered together that they understood. Meanwhile, Kong Moying cursed in his mind. He remembered how his grandfather had always warned him never to come to this place. Now he regretted coming and prayed desperately that he could survive and leave alive. Elsewhere, Hyobong looked back and asked curiously that since the dragon turtle had dragon heads and a turtle's body, the winged white tiger might simply be a white tiger with white fur. Baek Ji replied helplessly that it was probably true. Then he imagined a tiger with wings and rubbed his chin thoughtfully, saying that it might even have wings, since the word wind was in its name. At that moment, thousands of birds suddenly burst out of the forest in panic. The air instantly felt heavy. Hyobong stared in shock as the horses panicked and stood up on their hind legs. Kong Moying quickly grabbed the reins and stammered that something was wrong with the horses. Mercenary felt a cold chill run down his spine. It felt as if the whole forest was shaking with fear. He had never felt such killing intent before. Munju was equally terrified, and thought that the bloodlust was so strong it could swallow the entire area. Anyone without strong martial skill would probably freeze in fear. Qianinji slowly got down from his horse with a serious expression. He thought that the being had finally appeared. However, the murderous energy was so overwhelming that he could not sense its exact location. He also could not understand how someone they had never met could have such intense bloodlust toward them. Suddenly, he was startled when he noticed Yowon's expression. At the same time, Yowon trembled slightly. He realized that the energy did not belong to a human. It felt more like the aura of a wild beast. He could not even measure its level or martial arts. Without warning, a figure jumped high into the sky in the distance. Yowon immediately drew his sword and warned that the enemy was coming. In the next moment, the man rushed forward and swung his blade with a powerful strike that seemed to split the sky. The attack hit the ground beneath Yowon's feet, and the force shook the surroundings. Qianinji raised his hand in shock and wondered what kind of power that was. Guchen shouted in fear, calling the Demon Lord. Yowon struggled to block the attack. He realized that the power clearly came from a blade. However, it was very different from the techniques used in Jianghu. The man's strength was far from normal. In pure power alone, he was almost equal to Yowon. Seeing this, the young man looked delighted. He let out an excited sound and shouted that he was truly lucky and that it had been worth moving faster than that other bastard. Yowon frowned in confusion. The man's words did not sound like the language used in Jianghu. He quickly asked Nano to analyze it. Nano immediately responded. It explained that although the speech contained heavy regional dialects, the language was Korean, specifically a North Korean dialect. Yowon asked in surprise if it was really Korean. Nano then displayed a map and explained that it was the language of a country located east of Jianghu. Yowon lowered his sword slightly and told Nano to translate the man's words. Meanwhile, the young man spoke again with cold determination. He said he needed to kill all of them before a certain bastard arrived. Then he asked whether Yowon was the combative divine Akui. Hearing this, young man was surprised. Taking advantage of the moment, Yowon quickly swung his sword upward. The young man jumped back and asked if Yowon was from Goryeo. Yowon stayed silent. He wondered if Goryeo was the name of the country Nano had mentioned. The man rested his sword on his shoulder and mocked him. He said that someone from Goryeo would not sneak in from the north like a rat. Yowon opened his mouth and urgently asked again if the man was really the combative divine Akui. He tried to explain that they had not come to fight and that their purpose for coming to Changbai Mountain was. Before he could finish, the man suddenly rushed forward and pressed the tip of his sword against Yowon's neck. Yowon immediately counterattacked. Their weapons clashed, releasing a powerful force that made the ground tremble. Yo-won felt frightened. The man's speed was unbelievable. If he had not been watching carefully, he would have died already. The man spoke excitedly. He said that Yo-won was the first person besides that one bastard who had blocked his attacks twice. Then he suddenly asked what Changbai Mountain had to do with anything. As he spoke, he swung his sword again with great force. Yo-won was thrown backward and could hardly believe what had just happened. As he struggled to steady himself, shock filled his mind. Blood slowly foamed from the wound on his cheek. He realized that the power he felt was reflective power chi. No, it was innate core energy, sharp and cutting like the wind. The man pointed his sword forward and attacked again, saying that there must be some misunderstanding. Yo-won carefully thought about the situation. He wondered who this man really was. This was completely different from how Zen Master 1 had described the combative divine Akui. The man stomped his foot on the ground and coldly said that if Yo-won met his comrades in hell, he should deliver a message. Right after that, the man jumped high into the air. Yo-won watched in alarm as the jade ornament hanging from the man's belt swung violently in the wind. A powerful gale began to form beneath him. Cheon-in-ji raised his hand heavily to block the incoming energy. Yo-won stared in shock. A huge vortex of energy roared as it spread through the area, shaking both heaven and earth. From above, the young man shouted excitedly that this place was Baekdu Mountain, not Changbai Mountain. Far away at Heaven Lake on the top of Changbai Mountain, a lone man sat quietly beside the water. The man clasped his hands and entered deep meditation. The surrounding energy began to move and fluctuate. Akui sat with his eyes half closed. His hair and beard gently floated as spiritual chi swirled around his body. Suddenly sensing something strange, he fell into deep thought. He wondered if a wind had risen from the north. When he saw the surface of the lake ripple unnaturally, his expression turned serious. If even Heaven Lake was reacting, the power must be enormous. A strong surge of chi was clearly coming from the north. He slowly stood up. He had been guarding the west just in case, but the disturbance was clearly coming from another direction. The other party had arrived before him. He realized that everything had been carefully planned. Looking at the violent vortex far away, Akui felt that something was wrong. The one responsible had slaughtered intruders before without even using wind power. So why was it using such power now? He wondered if someone strong enough had appeared and forced that being to release its full power. A dark thought crossed his mind. If he failed to stop it quickly, the entrance of Jangbak Mountain might once again be covered in blood. Meanwhile, powerful wind blades swept across the land. They cut through trees and slashed the ground as if trying to tear the earth apart. At the very center of the violent storm stood the white tiger, looking arrogant. Yo-won frowned as he watched. The wind carried a sharp killing intent, and the storm mixed with mist descending from the clouds. As he thought about it, he looked up at the chaotic scene in the sky. On the ground, Wang Hul urgently waved his arm and shouted for everyone to spread out and stay away from the strong wind. As soon as he finished speaking, a rider rushed forward and called for an attack. Manju held tightly onto her horse and panicked, saying that the wind was too strong for them to move. Hyobong shouted loudly for everyone to get off their horses. The violent wind struck the horses, and Manju cried out angrily. She said the situation was crazy. The storm alone was already impossible to control, and now the horses were being destroyed as well. Wang Hul clenched his fists and forced himself to stay calm. He shouted, asking how long they would just stand there without doing anything. In his mind, he decided that they only needed to stop the one who created the storm. Right after that, he ordered everyone to attack. At once, Baekji, Manju and Wang Hul used their techniques. At the same time, Chok Sama, Manhwa and another fighter attacked from the other side. All their attacks rushed toward White Tiger at the same moment. White Tiger showed a faint sneer. With almost no effort, he controlled the wind and scattered their attacks. He waved his hand carelessly and mocked them, calling them fools. In the next moment, the attacks were pushed back toward their owners. Those who were hit screamed in pain. Baekji and Wang Hul struggled hard to resist the force. Manju avoided it with great effort, gritting her teeth as she realized the power inside the whirlwind was growing stronger and faster. Suddenly, the wind threw her backward and she cried out in shock. At that moment, a hand caught her by the waist. Yo-won firmly planted his feet on the ground and caught her safely. Manju blushed with embarrassment and looked up at him shyly, calling him the cult leader. Yo-won gently set her down and warned her that the situation was unusual and they must be careful. After calming herself, she sincerely thanked him. Yo-won then took her hand and told her to move away from the storm with the disciples. Manju blushed again and nodded, saying she understood his order. On the other side, Cheon-in-ji stood ready with his sword. In disbelief, he wondered how a human could create such a powerful wind. He carefully concluded that this was beyond martial arts and more like a natural disaster. Without hesitation, he threw his sword into the air and shouted that they must stop the person creating the storm no matter what. Jusheng Dan also released his technique and declared that he would help. Both attacks flew straight toward White Tiger. However, with a simple wave of his hand, White Tiger created a violent wind that easily blocked them. Cheon-in-ji was shocked. He realized the returning force was extremely powerful, and even using all his kai in a single sword was not enough. Suddenly, one sword shattered. At the same time, Mercenary suddenly coughed up blood. White Tiger crushed the remaining swords and shouted with contempt that they were foolish to think they could break through his wind. Soon after, Qian collapsed as well, coughing blood. He realized in shock that their kai was connected, which caused internal injuries. Fragments of the broken swords flew toward them. Qian shouted in alarm, warning that the shards were coming. Instantly, Yoan raised his hand and created a barrier that blocked all the fragments. The people behind him sighed with relief and thanked him for protecting them. However, Yoan felt uneasy. He realized that White Tiger could even block a flying kai sword aura, which meant that method would no longer work. As he watched the sword spinning inside the vortex, his attention focused on one particular blade. When one sword suddenly broke through the wind and flew toward White Tiger, Yoan was surprised. Dan also shouted in excitement, thinking it had worked. But the moment the sword reached the whirlwind, White Tiger redirected the wind and instantly shattered it. Dan gritted his teeth and realized that the sword's kai had been cut off the moment it entered the storm. He quickly created an ice shield to block the flying fragments. Yoan moved closer and asked how he had done that and whether he had placed aura on the blade. Dan turned back in surprise and explained that he had not used aura alone. He had also filled the sword with cold energy. Hearing this, Yoan was greatly surprised. He looked at the raging tornado and wondered if cold energy could really pierce the storm. As he observed White Tiger inside the whirlwind, Yoan frowned and began to think that this method might actually work. Dan quickly warned him to be careful if he planned to control a sword with kai. He explained that the moment his sword entered the tornado, his true kai had been cut off. This made Yoan uneasy. He thought that the tornado must be formed from the true wind element. He then asked Nano how such a tornado had formed. Nano quickly analyzed it and explained that although it was not technical, it worked like a normal tornado. It was formed by the collision between cold air from the clouds and hot air near the ground. Yoan looked confused and asked what hot air near the ground meant. Nano explained that it could be understood as high heat energy. Yoan then asked how to stop it. Nano replied that if he could control one of the two currents, the tornado should disappear. Hearing this, Yoan was shocked. After thinking for a moment, he decided it was worth trying. Meanwhile, White Tiger arrogantly told them to keep watching. He shouted that he would kill them all. When he noticed Yoan slowly walking toward him, he looked confused for a moment. Then he sneered and mocked Yoan, saying that even the other man had failed to stop his tornado. Laughing loudly, he said that if Yoan wanted to die, he should keep walking. But after that, Yoan gathered energy in his palm and the air around him began to surge violently. Large blocks of ice formed around the White Tiger. Seeing this, the White Tiger wondered if it was cold kai. He roared angrily and demanded how a human could produce such powerful cold kai. As more ice swords appeared, he declared that this power was beyond human limits, and believed it came from the essence core of a mythical creature. Furious, he cursed loudly. The White Tiger then controlled the tornado and smashed the surrounding ice swords into countless fragments. He shouted that he did not know what Yoan was planning, but he would crush him before he could try anything. On the ground, Wang Hul shouted in shock that the tornado was moving faster and its kai was spreading. Munju urgently warned the Demon Lord to be careful. Yoan suddenly swung his arm forward. The remaining ice swords shot toward the tornado. The White Tiger cried out in disbelief, asking how Yoan could control so many swords at once. Yoan roared that if his opponent refused to come out, he would drag him out by force. Then he released even more energy. People below gasped as the tornado slowly weakened. The White Tiger cursed in frustration, wondering how Yoan learned such a technique while struggling to keep the wind spinning. He also felt the heat from the ground quickly cooling. At the same time, Yoan's face turned pale. He groaned softly, realizing that creating ice swords while resisting the tornado was draining a huge amount of true kai. The dark clouds slowly cleared and sunlight began to shine down. Soon the tornado weakened completely and disappeared. The White Tiger froze in disbelief. His tornado had been broken. Grinding his teeth, he cursed Yoan and roared wildly. He grabbed his sword and rushed straight toward Yoan. Yoan coldly said that it was now his turn. Hearing this, the White Tiger's eyes turned red and both of them attacked at the same time. They clashed fiercely in the air. The White Tiger shouted angrily, accusing Yoan of arrogance and asking if he had become confident just because he broke the tornado. Yoan noticed the change in his opponent's eyes and wondered if it was the reverse blood demonic arts. He soon rejected the idea, thinking it was more like a beast's instinct. Watching the fight, Mercenary was shocked. Yoan had stopped the Demon Lord's sword and the technique was not from Zhengyan. He began to question who Yoan really was. At the same time, Qian frowned. Something felt wrong. He remembered that the combat divine fought without weapons and wondered if the boy could really be him. Although Yoan's martial arts were incredibly advanced, while fighting, Yoan also felt fear. White Tiger's blade technique was completely different from anything in Zhengyan. Each strike felt like a final technique instead of a flowing combination. The White Tiger cursed in frustration. If Yoan were a normal human, he would have died many times already. As he watched Yo-won attack non-stop, he felt that the blade technique seemed strangely familiar, as if he had seen it before. When Yo-won's sword flashed toward him, the white tiger quickly tilted his head to dodge. He realized that even a tiny opening allowed Yo-won to attack his weak points. As the blade nearly reached his neck, the white tiger knocked it away and decided he had to defeat Yo-won first. He swung his sword with great force. Yo-won blocked it, but in that moment the white tiger moved behind him at incredible speed. Yo-won sensed the attack from behind and was alarmed. The white tiger had become even faster. Still, Yo-won believed he had more Kai and calmly countered. Yo-won frowned, thinking that although he pushed white tiger into danger many times, the man always escaped because of his speed. As the white tiger rushed again, Yo-won noticed that his attacks flowed like the wind. He decided to strike at the same moment. Yo-won rushed forward with both swords. The white tiger tilted his head to avoid the attack. Yo-won was shocked to see him block the strike while bending his arm backward in a strange position. His surprise grew when the white tiger instantly counterattacked. While defending, Yo-won wondered how his opponent avoided the attack without even seeing it. Furious, the white tiger shouted at him to block the next attack too. He then released a violent gale. A powerful vortex rushed toward Yo-won, and the air exploded. People below screamed in panic and called out the demon lord's name. The white tiger sneered and said Yo-won was extremely annoying. Yo-won, however, carefully thought about the white tiger's beast-like instincts. He had never faced an opponent like this before. Watching the battle, Hyobong asked in disbelief who Yo-won really was to fight evenly with the demon lord. Munju hesitated and said that the combat divine fought barehanded, so it might not be him. Yo-won then put one sword back into its sheath and realized it was still not enough. Seeing this, the white tiger mocked him, asking if he thought he could fight with only one hand. Yo-won firmly replied that he could and said he would now fight with everything he had. In his mind, he decided that to face the white tiger properly he had to use the demon god sword art. He sheathed his sword and thought that neither using both blades nor the heavenly demon sword art would be enough. The white tiger laughed and asked what he was doing, saying he should use both hands if he truly wanted to fight. Yo-won coldly replied that he would not. Suddenly, a red stream of energy began to gather and spin at Yo-won's chest. He released it instantly, spreading its overwhelming power through the air. With a serious expression, he declared that from this moment he would face his opponent properly. The orange-haired man shouted in shock and called to the cult leader. Chok-sama, filled with fear, said that even the air around them had completely changed. Mercenary was also shocked. Even after seeing it again, he admitted that the dark demonic aura was terrifying. The white tiger stared angrily and demanded to know if Yo-won had taken more than one spirit beast and was even trying to reach the immortal realm. Before he could finish speaking, Yo-won suddenly rushed forward and swung his sword. Startled, the white tiger quickly turned and raised his sword to block. Clenching his teeth, he could not believe how Yo-won had become so fast. The white tiger fought back with all his strength and attacked continuously, thinking angrily that Yo-won was forcing him to fight seriously. With determination, he lifted his sword and charged forward like a missile, shouting that he would kill Yo-won. At the same time, Yo-won's face hardened. His power burst out like a dragon rushing toward the white tiger. The white tiger screamed as his body was pierced again and again. Munju and Hyobong were shocked by the sight, while Cheon-in-ji was even more terrified. With his mouth open, he thought that defeating such a fierce man instantly looked similar to the heavenly demon sword art. However, the way the sword was held was different. After observing carefully, he realized something frightening. The technique was the demon god sword art. Soon, the white tiger's body fell heavily to the ground while Yo-won landed lightly. Turning away, Yo-won calmly withdrew his energy, and thought that although the first strike had been blocked, the next 23 attacks had pierced every vital point. Even great dynamic vision would not have avoided that, so the white tiger should already be dead. Suddenly, the atmosphere became heavy. Yo-won's eyes widened as he felt energy coming from the white tiger's body. A violent killing intent spread from the corpse. Then the white tiger suddenly stood up. The wounds on his body healed rapidly. Yo-won was stunned as even the vital points that had been pierced were recovering as fast as Nano's self-repair ability. Those watching nearby cried out in disbelief, wondering if he was even human. The white tiger's muscles swelled as he dug his hand into the ground and cursed. He roared that Yo-won was forcing him to fight seriously. His body slowly began to grow larger. Yo-won held his sword carefully and realized this was not the reverse blood demon art but something else. The white tiger was transforming. Darkness slowly covered his body until only two glowing red eyes remained. Seeing this, Yo-won felt uneasy. The creature in front of him was no longer human. He decided they had to stop the transformation before it finished. Yo-won pushed off the ground and rushed forward instantly. If even the demon god sword art could not kill him, then the only choice was to cut off his head in one strike. His pupils shrank as he raised his sword to attack. At that moment, a kui suddenly descended from the sky and struck the white tiger with a powerful blow. The white tiger screamed as the ground exploded. Stones and dirt flew everywhere, forcing Yo-won to stop. The ground cracked violently as sharp fissures shot upward. Akui pressed the white tiger's head into the ground, making him groan in pain. Akui then looked up and saw Yowon standing nearby with a sword in his hand. He frowned, thinking that the pressure of that attack should have been unbearable, yet Yowon had endured it. Yowon also stared at the man in the straw hat suspiciously. As Akui stood arrogantly on the white tiger's head, Yowon felt how powerful he was. Even without a weapon, the martial aura around him was terrifying and purer than the white tiger's. Yowon started to say that the man might be the war god. Before he finished speaking, Akui raised his arm and pointed his fist at him. Yowon sensed danger and cursed inwardly. A violent energy shot through the air, cutting across the ground where Yowon had been standing and blasting rocks apart. Manju and Hyobong shouted in panic, saying the cult leader had just appeared. Akui rushed forward at full speed, wondering how the man could still fight. The opponent's spiritual power had already reached its peak, and he had trained in the strongest martial arts of the Eastern Peninsula for almost 120 years. Because they fought once every 10 years, Akui knew better than anyone how powerful that man was. If someone could fight such a person who should have already ascended, then that person must also be near the ultimate peak of martial arts. He wondered if that mysterious figure had appeared again. While flying above, Akui watched the battle below and briefly stopped. Pressing his lips together, he realized it was not that person, and wondered how Yowon had pushed such a powerful opponent so far. After observing carefully, he sensed a dark aura and concluded that Yowon must have absorbed the power of a spirit beast. If someone with that power had entered Jangbak Mountain, the target could only be the origin core of the Wind White Tiger. With that thought, he immediately dove down and gathered all his power into his fist. Because of that reason, he could not allow Yowon to die there. He descended and threw a powerful punch. After that strike, the area around Akui became silent. Even after using the Void Fist twice, Yowon's energy had not weakened but had grown stronger. Looking at Yowon, Akui was surprised and realized that Yowon had blocked his punch with a formless sword. It had been 20 years since anyone had stopped his punch twice. Calmly, Akui said that Yowon was a master of the life and death realm. Yowon clenched his fists and replied that Akui was the same. Yowon thought that someone whose punches could twist space must have reached the ultimate peak of that realm. Before, strengthening his aura with Heavenly Demon Kai had been enough, but this was the first time he had needed to form a formless sword to defend himself. Seeing that Yowon was safe, the people nearby shouted in relief and wondered who the man was. Qian and Ji suddenly cried out in shock, declaring that the man was the war god, Akui. Hearing this, Jusheng Dan widened his eyes in fear, unable to believe that such a master truly existed. Marikium was also shocked. He said that only the cult leader could face such a monster. He thought carefully about it. The war god was so powerful that even someone like him, a master of the manifestation realm, felt small in comparison. Their own cult leader was known as the demon god. As he looked at the two figures facing each other with dark expressions, he realized that two of the 5 great masters who held the title of god were fighting. From the direction of Akui and Yowon, 2 streams of blue and crimson power crashed together in the air. The force spread everywhere. Many people dropped to their knees, holding their chests and crying out. They wondered how Kai could be so powerful and said they could not breathe. Yowon frowned coldly and said that since Akui had attacked him twice already, it seemed Akui had no intention of talking. Akui stayed silent for a moment as if thinking. He started to speak, but suddenly someone groaned in pain. They noticed the white tiger struggling to get up beneath them. Akui looked slightly surprised and quickly jumped back. The white tiger slowly sat up while gripping the ground. He angrily cursed Akui and asked how he dared to crush him like that. Akui replied calmly that the white tiger had tried to break the oath first and told him to go back. Hearing this made the white tiger furious. He shouted that it would never happen and asked if Akui really thought he would obey him. But he suddenly coughed violently and spat blood. Looking at the blood on his hand, the white tiger wondered if Akui's punch had caused internal injuries. Then he checked his body and realized his wounds had not fully healed yet. He turned toward Yowon and exploded with anger. He said he knew it and accused Yowon of absorbing the core essence of the corrupted mythical creature. Hearing that, Yowon became suspicious. He wondered if the white tiger was talking about Heavenly Demon Kai and asked what he meant by defiled. The white tiger shouted angrily and told him to stop pretending. At that moment, Akui placed a hand on the white tiger's shoulder and firmly told him to calm down. The white tiger glared at him and warned that if Akui did not remove his hand, he would break his wrist. Akui narrowed his eyes and asked if the white tiger wanted to break the oath and face the consequences. Hearing that, the white tiger immediately went silent. Sweat ran down his forehead. He shook off Akui's hand and cursed him angrily, saying he would kill him someday. Then he tried to leave. At that moment, Yowon stomped on the ground. Blue energy burst out beneath him and curved through the air. It formed a wall of sharp ice spikes that blocked the white tiger's path. The white tiger stopped in shock and stared at the ice spikes in disbelief. Yowon looked at him with cold violet eyes and asked who said he could leave. The white tiger's face darkened. Showing his sharp teeth, he slashed at the ice wall and said ice alone could never stop him. but his attack bounced back. He was confused and wondered why his sword had been repelled. Then he raised his fists and rushed forward, throwing thousands of punches at the ice wall. The wall did not move at all. The white tiger widened his eyes in shock. He could not believe ice could be so hard. It was completely different from the ice he had faced before. While attacking the wall again and again, he thought that Yowon must have absorbed the core essence. But he wondered if Yowon was even human. He believed he could not break through unless he returned to his original form. He pulled back his arm and felt that Akui's earlier attack was disturbing the flow of his kai. He wondered if he should simply force it aside and destroy everything. At that moment, Yowon launched an invisible sword and said that he had already told him he would not let him leave. Seeing the attack, the white tiger was shocked. He realized it was an invisible sword. Suddenly, crimson energy burst out violently from deep within the ice. It shattered the ice from the inside and spread into the air. As the dust slowly cleared, Yowon paused. His eyes widened in shock when he realized that the white tiger had stopped his invisible sword. Then he saw Akui rushing forward to block the attack for the white tiger. Yowon was even more surprised when he realized Akui had done it with his bare hand. Energy gathered in Akui's palm as he focused all his strength into a punch. When he struck the ground, the earth and rocks shattered. Yowon quickly jumped into the air to avoid the attack. After landing safely, he realized something important. The cold kai that maintained the ice spikes had been cut off. Akui must have noticed that Yowon needed to keep supplying cold kai to keep the ice strong. Akui turned his head toward the white tiger who was jumping over the broken ice wall, and told him to move faster. Seeing this, Yowon quickly launched another attack and shouted for them to stop. But at that moment, Akui dashed forward and blocked his path. His powerful aura exploded as his arm muscles tightened. He clenched his fist and threw a punch. Yowon felt confused when he saw it. It looked like a simple punch, but it was far from simple. It was a perfect strike, as if countless punches had combined into one path. The power inside it felt like a volcano about to erupt. Akui had removed every unnecessary movement and focused all his strength into that single blow. Yowon realized why no one had ever stopped Akui after he mastered that technique. Any master in the life and death realm would find it extremely difficult to react in time. But at that critical moment, many crimson swords suddenly appeared behind Yowon. They shot forward through the air. Using 2 fingers, he controlled them with his energy to block the punch. Akui was shocked and wondered if Yowon was using the invisible sword technique to counter him. The 2 attacks collided violently. Rocks and debris flew everywhere. In the distance, the white tiger heard the explosion and turned around. When the shockwave reached him, he was deeply shocked and quickly ran forward to see what was happening. Outside, Wanghul and Songhua shouted in worry and called for the demon god. Yowon's grandfather also anxiously called out to him in his thoughts. The massive power spread like a raging flood. People were thrown away by the waves of energy as they screamed in terror. The ground collapsed and formed a huge crater while thick dust rose into the sky. The people nearby coughed and nervously wondered what kind of powerful shockwave it was. They asked if the demon god was safe. Inside the thick dust, a person's silhouette could be seen standing firmly. The onlookers worried that the demon god might have been defeated. But then someone shouted for everyone to look. Inside the huge cracked crater, 2 figures were standing on opposite rocky ledges, facing each other. Yowon's long hair waved in the wind as he stood straight and looked at his opponent. Across from him, Akui's hat broke apart and revealed his white hair. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth and he wiped it away while staring coldly at Yowon. Just as Akui moved to punch, several crimson swords suddenly appeared behind Yowon and shot forward. Yowon gathered his energy and controlled them with 2 fingers to block the attack. Seeing this, Akui was shocked and wondered if it was the formless sword of unification. Their techniques collided violently, sending rocks and debris flying. In the next moment, Akui kicked forward quickly. Yowon widened his eyes and leaned back to avoid it. Akui followed with many palm strikes aimed at Yowon's stomach. However, the attack had no effect. Akui pulled his shaking hand back and realized the rebound force was powerful. It had been a long time since his fist had gone numb like that. Taking the chance, Yowon thrust 2 fingers forward and released a burst of energy. Akui stared in surprise. A huge explosion followed, shaking the sky. Soon, both men stood on opposite rocks inside a large broken crater. Pieces of Akui's hat were scattered on the ground. Yowon sighed and thought that every move Akui used was meant to kill. While watching his opponent, Yowon admitted that his kai was stronger than Akui's. However, Akui had gathered many martial arts into one and created such power. Achieving this without an origin core was impressive, even if they were enemies. Yowon also thought about the unification of sword forms. It combined the 24 forms of the heavenly demon sword art into one final technique created by the founder at the peak of the life and death realm. Akui seemed able to combine all his fist techniques into one punch and use it freely. Akui suddenly laughed with excitement. He said it had been a long time since he had faced a real opponent. Lowering his stance, he declared that holding back against someone like Yowon would be disrespectful. He said Yowon was not just an intruder but a worthy rival, and it had been decades since he used the limitless void fist. As he finished speaking, a powerful aura burst from Akui. The people watching cried out in fear as the surrounding space seemed to twist. Yoan clenched his fist and said he would return those words. His power rose violently. Energy gathered around him and formed sharp swords in the air under his control. With a dark expression, Yoan warned that if Akui relaxed even slightly, he would die. Seeing this, Akui became cautious and realized Yoan had also been hiding his true power. The pressure from their energies shocked everyone nearby. Jian and Ji anxiously understood that the strength Yoan had shown before was not his full power. Although he knew Yoan had absorbed an origin core, controlling so many types of Kai in one body was incredible. Looking at Yoan, he thought the heavenly demon Kai acted as the core that balanced three completely different powers. Watching the battle, he prayed silently that this fight would decide who was truly the strongest under heaven, and hoped Yoan would be careful. The tension between Yoan and Akui grew heavier. Yoan frowned and realized that Akui's stance had no weakness. His attack and defense were both perfect. At the same time, Akui admitted to himself that he had not felt such tension in years. It was his first time seeing attributes added to a formless sword. The swords Yoan created felt even more dangerous because they were mixed with his energy. If Yoan controlled three formless swords properly, it would be like fighting three masters at once. Akui decided he must stay close and give Yoan no chance. With that thought, Akui stomped forward and rushed in at great speed. His fist shot toward Yoan like a bullet tearing through the air. At that moment, Yoan focused energy into his two fingers and pulled his arm back. The wind pressure was strong, but he believed he could handle it. A huge crimson wave of energy burst from his fingers and swept across the sky like a blood-colored blade. Soon the blue and red forces crashed together, throwing rocks into the air and twisting the space around them. Yoan realized the wind pressure was meant to hide the real power of Akui's punch. If he focused only on the wind, the punch would hit his chest. He then sharpened his energy into a spike and shot it straight at Akui. Akui was surprised and wondered if Yoan had seen through his move. He quickly raised his left hand and punched forward to block it. An invisible wall formed between the attacks and cracks spread across it. Akui thought coldly that Yoan had blocked it but not fully stopped it. Even with attributes, it should not break through. Suddenly, the red energy opened a small gap in the cracked barrier. Akui was shocked and realized it had pierced through. He pressed his foot into the ground to resist, but the earth and stones around him exploded upward. Akui quickly jumped aside, thinking the sword could not stop the lightning Kai and forcing through would be difficult. Before he could recover, a huge sword fell from the sky toward him. Feeling the crushing pressure, Akui felt fear. As it rushed down, he angrily wondered if Yoan could also use sword techniques. Realizing he could not dodge it, he understood that distorting space alone would not stop it. He had no choice. Akui gathered all his power and activated his technique. Gong, Void. Limitless Void Fist. He threw a powerful punch upward. A mass of invisible strikes shot out and met the blazing red sword. He continued attacking from different angles to block it. The crimson sword and invisible fist collided directly, shaking the space around them. The shockwave spread everywhere. Akui dug his feet into the ground as he was pushed back, while Yoan also struggled to stay standing. Yoan frowned and realized that concentrating power into a formless fist had shattered the formless sword and forced the energy backward. Meanwhile, the three swords Yoan created still floated firmly in the air. From a distance, Akui saw this, and wondered if Yoan had already recovered. It seemed Yoan still had plenty of Kai left. Akui tried to stay calm but knew the situation had become difficult. Although his martial skill could produce similar power, his chi was lacking. Maintaining three formless swords without exhausting Kai felt like fighting a spirit beast before ascension. Akui narrowed his eyes and decided he had no other choice. He thought he must sacrifice a little to gain something greater. In his mind, a formless sword with attributes had power similar to a concentrated formless fist, so he decided to destroy all three formless swords at the same time with his formless fist. After that, he planned to defeat Yoan using the secret technique of the limitless void fist. After making up his mind, Akui pushed himself hard off the ground and rushed forward. He knew he would have to endure the backlash of Kai reversal 3 times, but he believed he could overcome it. He quickly moved toward Yoan. As he got closer, he started to feel suspicious. It felt strange that he had come so near, yet Yoan made no movement. Akui thought carefully. He did not know what Yoan was planning, but getting closer was actually better for him. At close range, he could use the limitless void fist with less damage. At that moment, Yoan suddenly smirked. He said that thanks to Akui he had learned something important. Seeing this, Akui's eyes widened in shock. Then Yoan expanded the 3 swords and said he would show his gratitude as he invoked the power of the war god. Stones and pieces of rock slowly rose from the ground and floated in the air as if pulled by an invisible force. At the tip of Yoan's formless sword, a huge attack gathered very quickly. The power condensed into a giant sphere of lightning, and the air around him crackled with violent energy. Akui, who had been rushing toward Yoan, suddenly stopped with a heavy stomp. The Eastern War God stared in shock at the terrifying attack forming before him. He realized that not only Yowan's power but even the attributes of the formless sword were being concentrated into one point. His eyes trembled, as he thought it was extremely dangerous. The attack finished charging in an instant. Yowan immediately thrust it toward Akui. Akui tried to step back but quickly realized he could not dodge it. The attack moved as fast as lightning. Gritting his teeth, he raised his fist and struck forward with all his strength. The space around his fist twisted and shrank as he used one of his ultimate techniques, the limitless void fist. The two forces crashed together with a huge explosion. Their powerful kai surged upward, and the shockwave alone made the onlookers' skin sting, forcing them to shield themselves. But Yowan's attack did not disappear. Akui struggled to hold it back. Blood spilled from his mouth as panic filled his mind. The attack was far stronger than when Yowan used normal sword techniques. If he endured any longer, he might die. Akui forced more power into his fist, pushing his body to endure the pressure. Veins bulged along his arm as he resisted with everything he had. However, the compressed space before his fist began to crack. Realizing he could not hold it, he grabbed his right arm with his other hand, and prepared to redirect the force instead of blocking it. With a strong twist of his body, he pushed the attack aside. The lightning sphere barely moved, but it was enough. It shot upward into the sky and then rushed toward the mountain peak behind him. Wang Hul, who saw everything happen in a moment, could only stare in shock and whisper, "Good heaven!" Even Songhua and Chok-sama turned just in time to see the strike. All the warriors of the demonic cult widened their eyes as the distant impact echoed. The mountain peak had been pierced completely through by the attack Akui had deflected. Pieces of rock and dust fell from the broken summit. Akui breathed heavily. His chest rose and fell as his arm hung uselessly at his side. Grabbing his shoulder, he looked down and muttered grimly that the bones and muscles in his right arm were twisted. He knew he could no longer use that arm. When he looked up, Yowan was still standing calmly, full of energy. The formless sword still floated around him, steady and unharmed. Akui's eyes widened in disbelief. Yowan gave a small smile, and said calmly that Akui was indeed impressive. He then added that next time he would fire them all at once, and asked if Akui could block that too. For the first time, deep fear filled Akui's heart. Yowan still had attacks left. Yowan continued smiling slightly, though he knew that gathering power into the attribute-infused formless sword had already used about 30% of his kai. Looking at Akui, he said it would be better if Akui accepted defeat peacefully. There was no mockery in his voice. He simply did not wish to kill a warrior who had reached such a level through human effort. Akui clenched his teeth and glared at him. In his heart, he knew that if such an attack came again, he would not be able to block it. Finally, Akui admitted that Yowan had won the match. After a short pause, he added that people often say new waters push away old waters, and Yowan was far stronger than the previous heavenly demon cult leader. Yowan frowned slightly, confused by the mention of the heavenly demon cult leader. Nearby, Qianinji was also confused and wondered if the war god knew his father and how old the man really was. A drop of sweat slid down Yowan's face as he realized something. Akui must belong to the same generation as his great-grandfather, which explained the countless years behind his martial arts. Akui was still breathing heavily, his fierce eyes fixed on Yowan. Yowan noticed that Akui had not completely given up. He still seemed determined to block the path to Zhongbak Mountain, making Yowan wonder what he was protecting so fiercely. But the formless sword still pointed at him. Yowan asked if Akui had any connection with his great-grandfather. Holding his injured shoulder, Akui replied that not exactly, but they had crossed paths and sparred a few times. Yowan lowered his swords and said that could still count as a connection. Then he asked why Akui was blocking access to Zhongbak Mountain. Akui's breathing slowly calmed. He explained that inside Zhongbak Mountain lived a being ordinary people could not handle, and he guarded the place to stop others from meeting it. Hearing this, the formless sword above Yowan disappeared as he remembered what Monk 1 had said earlier. He asked if Akui meant the fearsome creature they mentioned before. Akui nodded and said the being had lived for a very long time and was filled with hatred, anger, and killing intent. It was extremely dangerous. Yowan smiled faintly and remarked that if Akui called it a being, then it probably was not human. Akui stiffened slightly in surprise and wondered if Yowan had figured it out after fighting it himself. Yowan then asked calmly whether he really looked like someone who could be harmed by it. Akui stayed silent and lowered his gaze. He admitted in his mind that Yowan was different. Even before the creature mutated, Yowan had the advantage, so he was not someone who needed protection. Akui explained that as long as he lived and guarded the place, he hoped the creature could someday be purified. But if he weakened and broke the 10-year pact, an uncontrollable massacre would occur in the Central Plains. Closing his eyes in pain, he thought that it might be more merciful for him to end his old friend himself. But now even that had become difficult. The 10-year pact was almost over, and his right arm would not heal in time. If he fought with everything he had, it might work, but if something went wrong, the creature could escape Zhongbak Mountain. Looking at Yowan again, Akui asked if his goal was also the spirit beast's origin core. Yoan replied without hesitation and asked if Akui thought he had any other reason. Akui gave a faint smile and said most people usually tried to hide their greed first. He sighed softly and said Yoan did not even bother hiding it. Still curious, he asked why someone as strong as Yoan, who likely had no rivals in the Central Plains, would seek the origin core. Yoan's eyes darkened slightly. In truth, he wanted to stop the future supreme martial god from gaining immortality with a spirit beast's origin core, though he knew Akui might not believe that. So he simply explained that recently a sect called the Extreme Martial Six Gates had spread through the Central Plains, and their leader was seeking immortality through spirit beasts. Before he could finish speaking, a huge explosion burst from a nearby mountain peak. The sudden blast made Akui stop and turn quickly. His eyes widened as he looked toward the peak. "That's the Heavenly Lake, the water pillar," he said while staring at the mountain. His voice sounded uneasy. He wondered what had just happened. At that moment, a loud and terrifying roar came from the peak. The sound was so powerful that the air itself seemed to shake. Chianinji's eyes widened in shock. He wondered what kind of beast could make such a roar. Yoan quickly looked up, disbelief filling his face. He wondered if it could be the wind-white bell tiger. Beside him, Akui clenched his left fist. His face looked serious and tense. He quietly muttered that the pact had finally been broken. Yoan felt confused and wondered what pact Akui was talking about, but there was no time to ask. Akui suddenly leapt forward and rushed toward the mountain using his void steps, moving at incredible speed. He thought that the creature was at the summit and that the roar confirmed his fears. Yoan immediately followed him. Using his lightness footwork, he quickly caught up. As he reached Akui, Yoan urgently asked if it was the wind-white tiger. Akui did not answer and continued moving forward. Yoan thought quickly. He guessed that while they were fighting, the Extreme Martial Six Gates must have attacked from behind. Akui glanced at him with surprise and repeated the name. Then he remembered that members of the Orthodox Alliance had mentioned them before. His voice became firm. He said things had gone too far and they had to stop it. Yoan nodded seriously. If the wind-white tiger's origin core fell into their hands, it could become very dangerous. But Akui shook his head. He said that was not the real problem. With urgency in his voice, he said they must never allow the beast to transform into its true form. Yoan stayed silent, thinking deeply. He wondered why Akui was not worried about the origin core. Perhaps Akui did not know how powerful the Extreme Martial Six Gates were. With their strength, they could probably deal with a spirit beast. Then Yoan suddenly looked ahead. His eyes widened in shock as cold sweat ran down his face. At the peak of Jangbak Mountain, the air was filled with a terrifying, killing intent so strong that it seemed to darken the sky. Yoan moved forward slowly, staring in amazement. Dark clouds were gathering in a sky that had been clear just moments ago. He wondered how such a strange event could happen. Akui rushed ahead and spoke in a serious voice. He said the beast had lived for nearly 1,000 years, and just before ascending it had become a fallen spirit beast. His eyes stayed fixed on the summit. He said it was a monster that must never be released into the world. At the peak stood the tiger in its terrifying true form. It was enormous, and every part of its body gave off a violent and destructive aura. The beast looked so powerful and furious that even the mountain seemed to tremble under its presence.